to Financial Minds. I'm Jaime Agostino. We are continuing our discussion on advocacy, why it matters, and how credit union staff at every level can play a role. I'm thrilled to welcome CrossState's Credit Union Association with us, bringing their expertise on how policy decisions impact our industry and the members we serve. So joining me today, we have Christina, Nicola, and Kevin. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself to the audience. So Christina, would you mind going first?
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. It's always a great opportunity to be with you. We really appreciate the partnership. I'm Christina Mahalik, Senior Vice President, Government Relations. I work closely with Nicola, who oversees our regulatory areas, and also Kevin, who is part of our grassroots and political action. So I will toss it on over to Nicola, who's right next to me.
Okay, thank you, Christina and Jamie. I'm Nicola Fogarty. I'm the Chief Regulatory Officer of CrossState. And as Christina said, I provide some oversight and guidance to credit unions in the regulatory realm and interacting with regulatory financial institution agencies. Also, I'm pleased to say that I have amazing compliance officers that work with our credit unions through the compliance hotline and resources and anywhere you need our help. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'll throw it over to Kevin.
Hey, it's great to be here. Kevin Oswald. I'm the Government Relations Associate here at CrossState, mainly focusing on our grassroots initiatives down in Congress and our two state capitals.
All right, well, welcome. So for those that are not familiar with CrossState Credit Union Association, could you explain what the association does in relationship to advocacy?
Sure. CrossState Credit Union Association is a regional trade association that represents over 400 credit unions in New Jersey and Pennsylvania who have over 93 billion in assets and 5.9 million members. So we have a really strong footprint of credit unions in both states. We are actually formed through the merger of the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association and the New Jersey Credit Union League back in 2020, where we provide professional development and education, compliance expertise, operational solutions, and of course, strong political and regulatory advocacy on to our member credit unions. So from an advocacy standpoint, CrossState's mission is to ensure credit unions have a healthy, supportive operating environment so they can grow and continue serving their members and communities. And we do that by working toward this by educating, engaging, and lobbying elected officials at both the state and federal levels. We also do local work too, if something would pop up down that pike, as well as interacting with regulators and other policy stakeholders to demonstrate the essential role credit unions play in the financial services marketplace. But I think it's really important to note the world of advocacy, that we don't do this work alone. Credit union involvement is very key and central to our advocacy efforts, and also our success, which we'll get into a little later. Kevin has some things to share on that. But lawmakers hear from trade associations like CrossState every day, lobbyists like ourselves here. But what sets credit union advocacy apart is when credit union leaders and volunteers share their own stories and member impact. So whether that's through Hike the Hill that we had in October, the GAC that's coming up February, March, in-district visits, special events, really the voices and experiences of our credit unions make the strongest case for supportive legislation. And then along that line, we also recognize that the legislative and political world can feel intimidating. So part of our role is to make advocacy accessible to everyone. We help credit unions understand the issues, connect them with their elected officials, and make participation as simple and effective as possible. So working together, we ensure credit unions are heard and represented where it matters most.
Okay, well, playing off that, then how does CrossState engage with the lawmakers and the regulators at both the state and federal levels?
Yeah, so when we talk about advocacy, what we're talking about is our relationship with people. And I think that's the most important thing to remember when we're talking about advocacy, is we talk about policy, we talk about regulation, but at the end of the day, what's important are the people that are writing this legislation, the staff members that are moving it, and the elected officials that are voting on it. So the most important thing that we can do when it comes to advocacy and regulatory issues is to have partnerships with the people down in DC and our state capitals that are writing these bills and moving them through the process. So what we do at CrossState is we engage with lawmakers at the state and federal levels through direct advocacy. So that means going to meet with our legislators to make sure that they understand our issues, that they've seen our stories, that they're happy to see us when we come in and ask them for something. And we reinforce that with our grassroots efforts. At the end of the day, lawmakers like to hear from people who live in their district. They want to hear from the people who go to the credit union. They want to hear from the employees about what types of issues a bill would create for them in their day to day. They want to hear from the people who live on their street who are credit union members. So we have a grassroots network that is designed to connect our members directly to their legislators, as easy and as simple as we can make it, to send them emails, give them a phone call, go and just talk to them to reinforce those relationships. And we do the same thing through education, through our foundation, with all the initiatives that we have, especially with financial literacy. So our goal really is to build positive and friendly relationships with the legislators and staff that matter in our state capitals. And that's something that we want to make accessible to all of our members.
Okay. Well, hopefully they are happy to see you. So
They usually are when we come
Most
into
of
the
time.
offices. There's always a smile because we ask for practical things,
Right.
nothing's out of the sort. So whenever we come into town, for example, America's Credit Union's Congressional Caucus, our Hike the Hill in October, I always say we're kind of the breath of fresh air when we go to the legislative offices.
good, good.
I always say that having once worked on the banking side, the reception we get at the either Senate or the House when we go to visit Capitol Hill is very different as credit union representatives than it was as a banker when I was back at a banker. They're actually glad to see us and they know we're going to talk about practical issues that affect everyday people.
Good.
So to tag on further to what Kevin was saying, legislation and regulation are tied together. If a legislator proposes a bill and it becomes law and it's unwieldy or it's overbearing, it then becomes bad regulation, or guidance. And so we work together as a tag team under the umbrella of advocacy. And specifically in the area of our relationship with financial institution regulatory agencies. CrossState engages very similarly to how we do on the legislative side. We reach out, we pay attention, we try to educate our members. And so we do a formal mix of advocacy with newsletters, comment letters, direct meetings, grassroots Hill engagement, education, information sharing. And we include our credit union leaders who wish to participate in those efforts. And so we also, as an association, we do ongoing regulatory monitoring and coalition work. And what that means is while the formal part happens, even every day, we're reaching out, we're absorbing information or data that we can prepare our credit unions proactively, or even provide them guidance or consulting in the area of regulatory initiatives or regulations that they need to comply with. And so a real good example of the support we get from credit unions is the Regulatory Review Committee and Government Relations Committees that we host regular meetings throughout the year. And we host them typically virtually, and we have dialogue about proposed rules, legislation coming down the pike, or something that is existing that may no longer have a good fit for credit unions, or just because times have changed, we need to address. And so with this interaction with these two committees, it turns into capturing the voice of our credit unions and our credit union leaders to turn them into responsive comment letters to regulators to share credit unions' opinions, thoughts, real world regulatory challenges and member challenges, or even community challenges for the communities that these credit unions serve. And so that actually does in fact influence regulators' opinions and how they proceed with final guidance and regulations. It doesn't always come out as we would wish, but that doesn't mean we stop there with the comment letter. Sometimes we do pursue even after something is finalized.
Okay. All right. So then
Mhm.
what are some of the biggest issues, currently affecting credit unions in Pennsylvania and New Jersey?
Nicole, do you want to take from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah, let me take it from a regulatory
I can follow up
perspective.
with
So,
legislative.
So even legislative, but regulatorily, CrossState takes a multi-channel approach. You just don't go in one lane. It includes advocacy, policy, and priorities. We do publications, whether it's daily or whether it's once a week, Compliance Connection weekly. All of our resources are available to our members online, but because we are in the advocacy lane of how CrossState serves credit unions, oftentimes we include non-members because clearly legislation and regulation affects our entire industry. So certainly we're not, just member focused, but it certainly does benefit the industry for the complete body of work that we do and the credit unions we do engage. Oftentimes, as I said, maybe non-members as well as members, because legislation at a state and federal level, as well as regulation at a federal level or state level, if that comes into play, especially with consumer guidance and protections. We do an encompassing multi-channel approach.
Okay.
I think from going back to the biggest issues currently affecting credit unions, and I'll let Nicola speak to, I think, we're looking at credit risk and delinquency,
Mhm.
interest rate risk, and payment to fraud. But I really think what we're seeing in the credit union space is increasing competition. Credit unions are competing not just with big banks, but increasingly with the fintechs and online lenders. These groups usually have, leaner operations, more agile digital offerings, and can scale faster. So larger institutions also have more resources to invest in technology, product innovation, and marketing, which ends up putting a lot of pressure on all credit unions. So from a legislative standpoint, we want to ensure any monetary policy, like we saw with the Genius Act that governs stablecoin, really provides credit unions parity and the same opportunities so they have a seat at the table if and when they are ready, to enter the space. So we also want to ensure that these emerging entities like fintechs are held to the same regulatory standards as financial institutions, so everybody's playing on the same level.
Mhm.
But it's also fair to say that credit unions must navigate a complex and evolving regulatory landscape, which we will be seeing with the Genius Act that Kevin will get to in a little bit. And that's going to end up requiring investments in compliance, whether it's anti-money laundering, data protection, more fraud controls. These are really all real costs, especially for those credit unions with tighter budgets. So part of our role as an advocacy team is really to pursue legislation that will provide credit unions regulatory relief while enhancing their operations and providing them opportunities to grow and serve their members and communities. And I think we're going to be getting into some of that a little bit later, but I'm going to
Yeah.
toss that back over to
Yeah.
Nicola
Yeah.
from
So to get
other challenges we're seeing.
So get into the nitty-gritty of what some of the top challenges are being seen is right in the NCUA's 2025 supervisory priorities. They highlighted them back in January, almost as a blueprint for credit unions to follow this year, even though some other issues have evolved. But specifically, credit risk and delinquency and charge-offs are still at the top of the pyramid there. And then interest rate risk and earnings pressure are constant, and certainly we've seen that in past years, but never so pressing as 2025 going into 2026. And then, of course, payment fraud across channels, whether it's real-time payment systems or it's card fraud, card not present fraud. And so just to get into a little bit of nitty-gritty with credit risk and delinquency and charge-offs, um, delinquencies are rising, unfortunately, particularly in credit card portfolios, and net charge-off rates are actually elevated, and NCUA is paying attention to that and actually working with credit unions because they understand the current political environment and economic environment that credit unions are operating in these days. Specifically in PA, New Jersey, this certainly could mean more stress for our credit unions on their loan portfolios, especially non-secured lending as economic conditions tighten and dependent upon the membership and the communities that those credit unions do serve in the two states. There are many credit unions that have an underserved charter as a part of their charter, so that presents a different set of challenges. And then interest rate risks and earnings pressure. Certainly, higher interest rates have squeezed net margins, interest margins for credit unions. Cost of funds have risen faster than ROA, return on assets, in some cases. And then managing balance sheet risk certainly has been a supervisory priority. And so NCUA examiners are going to be focused on that as they come into a credit union, no matter how small or how large the assets are of the credit union. Also, liquidity risk and the role of central liquidity facility. Given interest rate stress and potential shocks, credit unions need to stay on top of that and be running those role plays as often as they can to ensure their credit union stays abreast of those kinds of things. And then what can I say about payment fraud? I think we have nightmares about payment fraud, whether it's real-time systems, a card present and card not present fraud, and credit unions are doing the best they can. And I can only say, work with your vendors who can help you with the prevention of some of this fraud, set up your systems, train your staff. And then also the Federal Reserve is putting in place certain processes and services and protections, as well as the Treasury, actually. We just heard from a Vice President of Treasury, U.S. Treasury Department Payment Frauds Solutions Division at our Hike the Hill recently. And actually, he showed us some tools that are online available to credit unions and other financial institutions that we had just heard about. We didn't really know about. So we as association are going to be pushing that information out and have started, and we'll continue to push that information out for solutions to our members.
Okay. Yeah,
that was a lot.
There is.
There's a lot. I could have went longer.
Well, that kind of leads me to my next question. So, are there any recent advocacy wins you're especially proud of?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been doing a lot of work this year, but the most important victory for us was definitely preserving our federal income tax exempt status this year. I'm hoping everyone is familiar with this, but credit unions are exempt from paying federal income taxes. It was designed this way since we have no shareholders and every member is an owner. We are reinvesting our earnings back into our membership. So since we're not generating profit for private investors, Congress decided to treat us differently and give us that federal income tax exemption. So we also operate under limitation that banks do not, such as field membership restrictions. So that tax exempt status, is very important to us because our credit unions rely on that money to reinvest into their membership. So this year, there was a threat to our tax status in H.R. 1. I'm sure most people would be more familiar with this as the One Big Beautiful Bill. There was some talk about putting an amendment into that massive bill that would remove our tax exempt status. So, and I would like to mention here, this is something that we're seeing more in advocacy that I think is worth pointing out. We are now operating in a very divided political climate, which is making it very hard for Congress to move smaller and more direct bills through Congress. So what's happening down in DC and more in our state capitals is that they're putting together these massive omnibus bills that just have, 3,000 things in them that are 600 pages long, and they open up a huge opportunity for members to insert all these little hostile amendments to get funding for something they want or to act something for an industry that they don't like. So a huge part of advocacy for us now is figuring out how to operate inside of that divided climate and make sure that we're paying attention to all of these potential amendments that could come through, because this impacted our tax status. It impacted the Genius Coin Act, with which I'll mention as well. So, anyone doing advocacy in this industry needs to be aware of that. It requires a lot more monitoring. It requires a lot more discussions with our lawmakers because a lot of these amendments, as we saw with the tax status, are happening behind closed doors, right? We're not allowed to go into the room where they're debating these budget amendments. So when we were looking at the tax status, we heard about this when it was still in committee. The budget went through the House Ways and Means Committee. So we heard from some friendly lawmakers there that there was a potential amendment that would strip us of our tax exempt status. Obviously, we were very concerned, and we launched a large grassroots initiative with America's credit unions that generated tens of thousands, almost 100,000 emails from our members in Pennsylvania and New Jersey to our members of Congress, basically telling them how important this tax exempt status is to their credit union, what it would do to them, especially our smaller credit unions, to lose that tax exempt status. Thankfully, because of our relationships and the relationships that our other league partners and associations had, we were able to defeat that amendment in the House Ways and Means Committee. So it didn't make it to the next stage of the bill. It wasn't passed. We were able to defeat it. This is huge because the tax exempt status really underpins, our credit unions, people helping people mission. And it really it's what lets us return value to our members. So we're thrilled that we were able to defeat that. We're really hopeful that, all the stories we shared and all the connections we made with our lawmakers is going to prevent this from coming up in the future. Because again, that's the concern with these big omnibus bills is that it's going to be very easy for someone to come back and try and revisit this issue next year or the year after. So we're going to continue to monitor that, but we're really happy with the way that our credit unions, our CEOs came together to make this their number one priority for months. This was a 5-month campaign. Everybody was fully on board. It was a fantastic response from all of our credit unions, big and small, just generating so much, in terms of outreach to our lawmakers. And I'd love to give a special shout out to all of the CEOs that came down to Washington, D.C. with us 3 or 4 times to hike the Hill, to meet with our members of Congress, to have those conversations with them repeatedly to make sure they understood how important this issue was to us. It was some long days down in DC.
Quite the force. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you got to have that consistency,
Yeah.
constantly giving
Yeah.
that message.
So protecting our tax status was fantastic. Another bill we defeated hostile amendments in was the Stablecoin Genius Act. For people not familiar with that, that's the Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for U.S. Stablecoins Act. Essentially, this is the first regulatory framework for payment stablecoins. So basically, the stablecoin is just a coin that's going to be backed by reserves of one-to-one by cash or short-term treasuries. So this was just establishing a regulatory framework for stablecoins. And what we saw again during the discussion of this gigantic bill was that people were trying to put in hostile amendments. In our case, that would have imposed interchange caps or capped interest rates for credit unions. So we were able again to launch a grassroots campaign and have some conversations with our lawmakers to make sure that those amendments that would be very harmful to our credit unions were not included in the final legislation. So we were very happy with both those victories, but we also do advocacy on the state level. So just bringing it down to Pennsylvania, we had legislation introduced in Pennsylvania. It's Pennsylvania House Bill 1553. That would basically reform how overdraft fees are handled in Pennsylvania. It would be very bad for our credit unions because it places severe limitations and regulatory burdens on our credit unions to justify their overdraft fees. So thankfully, we were able to meet with our state officials, especially in the state Senate in Pennsylvania, and we were able to stall that legislation before it was passed. Down in New Jersey, we're working on proactive legislation with financial literacy. We have a state senator, Vin Gopal, who's drafting legislation that's going to make financial education a requirement for high school students in New Jersey for the first time. So we're very excited about that. Currently, it's only a requirement for middle school students, and the curriculum is very bare bones. So what our legislation is going to do is going to make that a requirement for all high school students And we're reforming the curriculum to make sure that includes more pertinent and up-to-date content so that it really does help these kids. We think financial literacy is very important. I think anyone who has attended one of our reality fairs and talked to some of the students would realize very quickly that there is a knowledge gap when it comes to finances for middle school and high school kids. And the earlier that you can get to them and you can help them understand some basic principles of finance, the better their finances are going to be as they go through college and start their careers. And I just would like to give a shout out to our foundation here. This past year, they've hosted more than 56 financial reality fairs, reaching more than 12,000 students in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And I'd also like to thank Vizzo for that as well. Fantastic partners supporting the foundation's work. It really does make such a huge difference in expanding our reach and promoting these financial education programs. So we love that collaboration. That's what it's all about. And we're really hopeful that this bill in New Jersey does go through. We think that we have a lot of support. It's a great bill. It's going to be really helpful for the students. And that's the last thing I'd leave here for advocacy. Sometimes their victories are defensive. It's preventing regulation that's bad. It's preventing a bad bill. And sometimes it's proactive. It's getting out there and it's changing the law to make sure that our kids are getting the education that they need. So we're flexible here. We're jumping federal, we're state, we're all over the place. There's so many things to pay attention to these days with how big these bills are, how complex they are, how many overlapping regulations there are out there now. So that's really where our government relations team, fills that gap for our credit unions. We're here to pay attention to this stuff 24/7 and relay that information to our CEOs and our members so that they can just take a look at it and say, hey, CrossState's on top of this. What do I need to do to help? Do I need to send an email? Do I need to go to DC with you to have that meeting with a lawmaker? That's really what we're trying to do at CrossState, and I think our team's doing a really good job.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely sounds like you guys are doing an amazing
It's a
job.
lot.
There's a lot going on. So thank you for
There's no
that.
competitive gene in Kevin whatsoever when it comes to our grassroots.
Well,
People helping people, managing relationships. The more you're there, the more you're talking to lawmakers about these bills, the more emails they see, the more phone calls they get, the more emphasis they place on our legislation. And, with credit unions, tooting our own horn here, all of the legislation that we bring to them is common sense. We're there advocating for good things, and that makes it really easy to have these conversations. Anyone who works at a credit union can tell you how many stories we have.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of other industries that can honestly say they're advocating for good things that matter to people. And that's what makes this so much fun for us. And advocacy should be fun. We got good bills. We have a good mission. We're promoting a good industry, and it's fun. Talking to people, building relationships with our CEOs, our members, our lawmakers. It's fun. These are all great people, and like I personally love going down to our state capital or DC and getting to sit down with them. I mean, the stuff they tell you is just fantastic.
well, that kind of makes me wonder then, what challenges do credit unions face when it comes to educating these lawmakers about, their unique struggles as well as their mission and what they need?
That's a really good question. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a challenge, but an observation, kind of going back to what Kevin was saying, that educating lawmakers requires a deep level of understanding about the credit union structure and mission because we are so unique. Many lawmakers, especially the newly elected ones that we're seeing coming in waves, in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Congress, aren't really fully familiar with the fact that credit unions are member-owned cooperatives, what it means to operate as a not-for-profit financial institution, how capital is accumulated, why the tax exemption exists, and why we prioritize member benefits and shareholder returns. That's always an eye-opener in conversations with our newly elect. So they also may not be aware of the regulatory and structural limitations credit unions also face compared with banks, such as member business lending caps, fee limitations and restrictions on accessing secondary capital. So we've been really successful in educating lawmakers during past debates on the tax exemption, as you know, Kevin shared
Mhm.
with Pennsylvania and New Jersey's work, as well as our lead counterparts in America's credit unions. And even during situations like the federal shutdown, the federal government shutdown. So credit unions really stepped up to assist members affected by the shutdown. And those stories, shared directly with elected officials, highlighted the uniqueness of the credit union model and our commitment to members' financial well-being. So the success of these efforts really come from consistent, unified messaging. So that's why ongoing education remains so important, and why data, metrics, and really that real member impact stories from credit unions continue to be those essential tools in helping lawmakers fully understand who we are, what our mission is, and the value we provide to not only our members, but their constituents.
Okay. So, as you guys have been talking, about the different legislation, how do the regulatory and legislative changes that are happening, like the CFPB rules, or you mentioned taxation, or even the cybersecurity laws,
Mhm.
impact then the member credit unions as well as their members?
Mhm. And that's a really, really good question. So, specifically with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that's been under siege themselves, changes in leadership and reduction in staff. It's being pared back and its spending budget curtailed. So, states period have been ramping up their own consumer protection initiatives for their own individual states, and both PA and New Jersey have specifically ramped up privacy initiatives, with PA strengthening breach notification and privacy related rules at the state level, not relying on the CFPB, which their whole mantra is to be consumer protecting consumers from a financial perspective. PA also introduced interchange and swipe fee proposals, and those bills would affect how interchange is treated for sales tax or could otherwise constrain interchange practices. These proposals have been fought by credit union groups because they would reduce card related income
Okay.
or create tax reporting complexities, and efforts paused in some sessions, but remain a legislative risk. So we stay on top of that from an advocacy standpoint, and certainly rely on our credit unions to tell us what those unintended consequences or real world consequences that are happening. So PA has also advanced bills that increase disclosure or limit overdraft practices, and for example, requiring notice each time an overdraft fee is charged so our consumers stay aware. And then New Jersey enacted a consumer data privacy law that imposes data subject rights, data protection requirements, and potential obligations around data processing activities. Credit unions that process New Jersey resident data must map data flows, support access, deletion requests, and review contracts with processors to ensure they're being fair and equitable to their members. And New Jersey has an active cybersecurity rulemaking and bills emerging that would require covered entities to develop formal cybersecurity plans and report incidents to the New Jersey's own cybersecurity department or relevant state authorities. The Department of Banking and Insurance, or DOBI as we call them, has also issued guidance regulation applying to financial firms surrounding cybersecurity as well. So you can tell a lot is going on. That's a mouthful. And certainly, as an association, we are staying abreast of these emerging topics, issues, and bills or proposed bills. But also, we're also solicited to provide information from a credit union perspective that informs these agencies. We have regular meetings with the Department of Banking and Insurance in New Jersey, and Christina can talk about, if she wishes, about the work we're doing with hopefully making inroads on changing the charter in PA to be more effective for our credit unions, especially our state chartered credit unions.
And if I could just add to Nicola's points about, the state legislation we saw with overdraft and interchange, even the taxation issue, credit card fees, interchange in general for credit cards. Even though we really don't take advantage of things just because they go away, it's just more, we still have to be mindful that it could always come back. So even though we were very successful on the state and federal levels, it's just, we still don't take that for granted that it's a done issue. So it's just another thing that we put on our chart to monitor. And especially as, Kevin was sharing with these huge omnibus bills, you can hide something so easily. So it's a lot of finding that needle in the haystack, really, approach to what we're seeing with legislation now.
All right. Well, then based on that chart that you're keeping there, Christina, are there specific bills or policy proposals you're watching right now?
Nicole, do you want to hit the policies?
Let me
Yeah.
start on the regulatory side.
Yeah.
So I'll keep it to two financial institution regulatory agencies, or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is one. While they're focused on consumer financial protection, as a result of that, they have some say in certain areas of how financial institutions behave, or rules or guidance that they have to adhere to. Also, the National Credit Union Administration, not only are they provide oversight to any federally insured credit unions, which includes state as well as federal credit unions. They also provide the oversight to the Share Insurance Fund. So from a safety and soundness aspect, they have a lot of power and authority over credit unions. Well, in a nutshell, both NCUA and CFPB have experienced unprecedented changes this year under the new administration that has been emerging and evolving over the past year. Both have had leadership changes that created uncertainty and shift towards deregulation for credit unions and financial institutions, with NCUA's reduced board going from three to bipartisan board to one, causing regulatory paralysis like we've never seen. So I sum that all up to say that it does have an impact on how both agencies operate and how they interact with financial institutions, including credit unions. So let me just talk about some of the effects. I won't go deep dive, but I'll just name them kind of on a high level. So the effects of NCUA and the relationship credit unions, as I mentioned, it caused regulatory paralysis. There's been no real emerging rules coming out of NCUA this year. Not only that, under one board member who happens to be the chair, Chairman Hoffman, they haven't even held regular board meetings, which are typically open and available to the public, showing transparency from the agency on what they're thinking, what they're doing, what they're planning. So we really haven't gotten that this year. There's also been a shift in supervisory approach. One benefit to credit unions was that because they had pared down their staff, eliminating almost 225, I believe, staff members, with some of that portion of that 225 actually retiring at the end of the year. Some left immediately under certain terms. But NCUA examiners have been a little bit short or a little bit stretched. So credit unions who are Camel 1 and 2 actually received a longer ramp up time for their next exam. So if you're Camel 1 or 2, they went from 18 months to they're not going to see their examiners likely for another 24 months rather than 18 months, or perhaps longer if they're at a Camel 1 rating. So that was one benefit credit unions were happy for. But their focus is more NCUA, NCFPB. Their focus is on really deregulation, rolling back regulations or proposed rules and guidance that was put in place under the last administration. The issue with that is when the next administration comes in after this one, they may put them back in place. So we're almost on a seesaw kind of rocky road right now. CFPB has suspended some rules, and under the current acting director of the CFPB, Russell Vogt, he's actually suspended some rules, and specifically under consumer protection and lending rules, specifically the 1071 rule that requires small business lending data collection. We considered that a win, and we lobbied for that to be rolled back, because if that rule would have been finalized, credit unions would have been under a burden of paperwork and documentation and data collection surrounding small business lending that would have been wholly burdensome to them. And so that actually was considered a win. Um, some of what they've rolled back, though, at the CFPB is oversight to payday lenders. Well, we don't like that because we're always trying to find solutions for our small asset credit unions and certainly our military serving credit unions who oftentimes there are payday lenders right outside the gate of the base who are preying on our vulnerable, maybe newer military members, and we don't want that to happen. So we relied on the CFPB to take a vigilant stance in relation to that. They've rolled back, they've pared back on that. They've lost a number of staff as well. And so, what does that say? There's increased volatility, in that environment. It causes uncertainty. So, CrossState, from our advocacy efforts and our close working relationship with our credit unions, we try to provide some stability and we try to provide some clarity with regard to that. There is going to be future restructuring of both of these agencies. So we are staying close to the leadership of both agencies, the NCUA and CFPB. We just had the Eastern Region Director, John Cutchy, at our Hike the Hill event last month, and he spoke extensively to our leaders, and our leaders appreciated his frankness and honesty in that meeting. So we'll do more of that in relation to these challenges.
From a legislative side, with the immediate tax fight behind us, of course, we're still remaining mindful about protecting the credit union tax exempt status. And we're looking at working to advance several lending flexibility bills that will strengthen credit union operations and give them greater flexibility to serve their members and communities. So these bills really represent a thoughtful and measured approach following our recent success in safeguarding this tax exemption. And those include the Veterans MBL, the Veterans Member Business Loan Act, which is sponsored by our very, very good friend, Representative Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. And that legislation would exempt loans made to veterans from the 12.25% member business lending cap. We're very pleased to see the bipartisan support that we've been able to build in Pennsylvania and New Jersey so far, including, both sides of the aisle from Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We're really happy to put our hat on that. And then there's also the Credit Union Lending for Business Growth Act, once again sponsored by our credit union fan and ally, Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, who I do have to share, who is on the House Ways and Means Committee and is very instrumental in our strategy of who to talk to, who we should be seeing along those couple 5 months as we're protecting the credit union tax exempt status. So we really, really appreciate the ongoing friendship that we have in that office. So with that act, it really would increase the threshold for loans that would qualify for a business member business lending loan from 50,000 to 100,000. And it would also allow credit unions to scale more effectively in serving small businesses while reducing operational costs overhead that would associate with preparing and processing these loans. And then the last lending flexibility bill is expanding access to Lending Options Act, which would really extend the maximum loan maturity for certain credit union loans from 15 to 20 years, if permitted, or longer if it was permitted by NCUA. And I think it's also important to note it would also allow loan maturities for 1 to 4 unit principal and non-principal dwellings to be extended to 30 years. So those are some of the just smart, common sense, germane legislation that we're looking at for potential, a financial services package that might be an opportunity earlier next year. We do have another bill. I'll just toss it over to Kevin so he doesn't feel left out with credit union board modernization to close us out.
Yeah, so the other bill that we're advancing is the Credit Union Board Modernization Act. What this bill does is it allows credit union boards to meet 6 times per year instead of the currently mandated monthly. It basically just updates what we feel is a little outdated requirement for them to meet every single month. It's been passed in the House unanimously. It's now advancing through the Senate. I'm happy to say we now have 49 co-sponsors on the legislation, including our own Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey, who was the most recent co-sponsor for us. Importantly, he serves on the Senate Banking Committee, which is a very important committee for credit union issues. And we're having meetings with our other three state U.S. senators from New Jersey and Pennsylvania to get them on as co-sponsors as well. So we are hopeful that this does move its way through the Senate. But with all this legislation, it's important for our credit union members and our CEOs to understand that we have to keep pushing these bills. Some of this stuff is great for us, but it's not a high priority for them unless we constantly reinforce, what it means to us, why we need this legislation, why it's important for them to do this for us. That's where the grassroots comes in. We need our members, we need our credit unions to join us in that mission. It's a lot more impactful when I can go into a meeting with these lawmakers and say, hey, I need you to co-sponsor this Senate bill. This is what it does. It's a very simple ask. But it's even more impactful when I go in and I say that, and they look at me and say, "Hey, I got 1,000 people emailed me this week about this bill." Like I'm already familiar with it. Like that's happened to us when we've gone down to DC to talk about our tax status, to talk about the Veteran Members Business Loan Act. We've had people emailing, and the staff is familiar with the bill, and they've taken it to the legislator before we've had the meeting. And it just makes the conversation so much more productive for us as professionals to go in there when they're familiar with the issues because we have people that are engaging with them on a member level.
Mhm.
So that's really where, this regulatory, legislative, and grassroots really intersects. How important it is for the average person to get on there and send a quick note down to DC. I mean, they do really pay attention. And I know a lot of people don't think that today. They say, what does it matter? I send one email, it's nothing. But it does. These offices, the staff down there, they're professionals. When they get hundreds of emails about a bill, they do pay attention to it. They do take it to their legislator. And when we go down there and reinforce that with, our professional advocates, with our CEOs, with our just repeatedly hammering away at it, they do start to act on this, and that's why we're getting co-sponsors on all these bills in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. We've had almost 100 meetings with our members of Congress in just New Jersey and Pennsylvania this year. And that's not counting all the staff meetings and emails and follow-ups and phone calls. Like advocacy takes time. It takes time to build momentum behind these bills. And I think that's, important to point out. That's really where we need our credit unions. That's where we need them involved in our process. We try and give them as much information as possible through our newsletters, webinars, talks like this where we educate them on what bills are important to us. But we do really need them to act and get involved in the process with us. And I'm sure any league and association would say the same thing, that the more their members are involved, the easier it is for them to get the meetings, to get the co-sponsorships, and to get to the right people to move this legislation through the committees that it needs to move through.
Yeah. Well, kind of based on that, we're running a little tight on time, but I am going to ask, it's obviously critical for credit unions to be involved in the advocacy process. So how do they get involved? How do the staff get involved at the credit union?
Mhm. So for staff, we specifically put information out there in several forms. We have daily newsletters, we have legislative newsletters, regulatory newsletters. Here at CrossState, we have a credit union advocacy network designed specifically for people who want to be more involved in advocacy, where we put out alerts to let them know exactly what's going on, a little bit more than we do in our daily newsletters, where we kind of give more of a broad overview. But we're at all of our events doing advocacy outreach as well. We really try and just everything that goes out, all of our media platforms, social media, we mention advocacy when it is important. We've also designed a grassroots action center to make it easy for people to engage. It's 2 clicks, sends an email directly to your member of Congress with all the information that you need to get involved. And if people want to be more involved in that, we're happy to take you to the state capitol. We're happy to go down to DC with you. We want people to attend our government relations events like our GAC, Hike the Hill. The more people who get involved, the more stories we have, and the more impactful the message is.
Mhm.
So that's where we are. And if a staff member listening to this wants to get involved, I would encourage them to visit their league or association website. We have an entire section there about grassroots advocacy and how they can get involved, and links to send a letter about all the bills that we're talking about here today. And I'm sure that almost every single league has something similar. And if you don't, and you're listening to this, you need to build it today to get members involved. We're here to be a resource. I want people involved in the process. I'm happy to sit down with anyone who wants to be more involved. It's the little things that add up when it comes to advocacy. Every email, every phone call, every event you attend, the points of contact we have with these legislators really matter. So,
Yeah.
And it's the same on the regulatory side. It's just jumping in there, getting involved, whether it's through our regulatory review committee or our government relations committee, or like Kevin said, jump on our website. Both on the legislative side, there's copious information. And then we actually operate a compliance hotline that is a web page with a lot of resources, but you can email us and you can call us. If there's a overburdensome regulation or guidance, or you think a policy no longer fits in this day and age, or your credit union has some special needs or inroads or insights into a proposed regulation that came out, or a request for information from a regulatory or government entity, we want to hear from you. And we're happy to help you put those words into action, into a comment letter, into feedback to a regulatory agency or to a government entity, or get it to a legislator who can help support us in our initiatives, whether it's on the regulatory side or it's on the legislative side. So echoing everything Kevin said, just reach out. We're here. We're here for you.
Well, thank you, all three of you, so much for joining me today. But before we close, Christina, any final thoughts for our listeners?
I just have to echo what Kevin said. We would love to have folks stay informed, build those relationships, get engaged with your league or CrossState, participate in those advocacy events, and really join that grassroots campaign and share your impact stories. That's the biggest. We need your stories. We have
Share
the
your
data.
stories.
We want the
Yep.
stories.
Okay.
And also
All right.
educate your staff and members. We have plentiful resources that you name it on our website that really does the ease of really getting people comfortable to enter the world of advocacy. And we're here all the way to lead that.
All right. Christina, Nicola, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today. And we will post links to the into the notes section of today's podcast that will give you access to a video that they have, as well as links to all of these resources that they're talking about. So please check out those notes so that you have access to all of those resources. So thank you again for joining me today. And I also have to thank Virtus AI No Solution for sponsoring today's episode. The benefits of Virtus AI No Solution include bringing data together to create a single view of member participation, helping you understand the depth of participation from each member, mining transaction data to better understand the member financial behaviors and opportunities for your products and services targeting, and also recognizing the stage of growth and understanding pathways that deepen that member engagement. To learn more about Viso Financial's partnership with Virtus AI, contact a corporate account manager or visit our website at www.vfccu.org. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please share the episode and subscribe. So keep advocating, keep asking questions, and keep making your voice count. Thanks for listening, and make it a great day.